Pocahontas, Chapter 2, Part 4. We're starting our reading on page 36. We left off where Pocahontas was entertaining John Smith at Werowocomoco. Powhatan wasn't around, so Pocahontas decided that she would show John Smith what she and her friends could do to show the greatness of their god Oki. At the end of the dance, the girls returned to the woods, took off their horns, and ran back to see how John had enjoyed the performance. Skipping and bobbing around him, they giggled. "Love you not me?" they asked. "Love you not me?" The next day, Powhatan arrived. Like all those in her tribe, Pocahontas would have known how her father's resentment at the English was growing. With Newport's arrival, there was a total of 200 settlers now, all with guns, all hungry for Indian corn, all expecting Powhatan to bow to their wishes. It was not only that they didn't seem to care that he was king of this land, it was as if Powhatan didn't even have the right to be a king since he wasn't English. So when John Smith invited him to Jamestown to receive presents from King James, Powhatan bristled. He wasn't going to bite on that bait, he said. "If your king has sent me presents," he replied, "I also am a king, and this is my land. Your father, Captain Newport, is to come to me, not I to him, nor yet to your fort." So they had to take the bed and the crown and the other gifts the long way around by water. Captain Newport insisted that they be accompanied by 120 men. He took 70 with him by river. John Smith took 50 by land. When they had all gathered at Werowocomoco, Powhatan took his place on his throne and waited. By this time he would have heard from Namontack about what kind of place England was. Stone towers, tall houses with floors on top of floors, long bridges, chariots to carry people around. It was more than Powhatan could imagine or wanted to imagine. He was glum. Even the trumpet which announced Newport must have been an irritation in his present mood. Powhatan went through the motions that were expected of him. However, receiving the bed, the ewer, the jug, the finger rings sent by an English nobleman, but when it came to the scarlet coat, he balked. Captain Newport wanted him to put it on then and there. Why? Was there some kind of bad magic in it? Namontack told him it was safe to put it on, so he did, but he wasn't happy about it. But when he was told to kneel so the crown could be put on his head, Powhatan absolutely refused. Even though Namontack said that kneeling was just part of the English custom, he wouldn't do it. He knew the English went on their knees when they talked to their god, and he wouldn't be tricked into doing anything he didn't understand. Finally, one of the men pushed down on his shoulders so that in spite of himself, Powhatan stooped slightly. Quickly, Captain Newport clapped the copper crown on Powhatan's bent head. Outside the longhouse, the English fired guns to mark the occasion. But Powhatan was annoyed by all the fuss. He had always been a king. He didn't need the English to make him one again. Of course he knew that he was expected to give gifts in return for the crown that he didn't want and the coat that he didn't trust. So, in an offhand way, he handed Newport the deerskin mantle he had been wearing. He tossed in a pair of his old moccasins and ordered a measly 7 bushels of corn to be presented to the English. It was just as John Smith had said. Powhatan would become prouder and stingier. But, in fact, the coronation probably had little to do with his change of attitude. Crown or no crown, Powhatan had just had enough of the English who could build stone towers and make guns but couldn't even feed themselves. After the English left, Powhatan told his people they were not to trade with them anymore. He told Pocahontas she was not to visit Jamestown. Her friendship with John Smith was over. The English were their enemies. Pocahontas understood that there was nothing more important to her people than loyalty to the tribe. Had she not felt that closeness at every sunrise and every sunset? Had she not celebrated that closeness every time she danced? Yet it was her father who had made John Smith her brother, and how could she order him out of her mind? How could she pretend that John was her enemy? Yet John did become an enemy to her people. No matter what he had to do, he was going to see that the English settlement survived. If he couldn't get corn by trade, he would fight for it. He'd burn down houses if that's what he had to do. He'd destroy what the Indians valued most, their canoes whittled and carved out of tree trunks with such effort, such care. But he would feed his people. Captain Newport was unhappy about all the clashes, and when he went back to London in December, he reported that he certainly had been friendly with the tribes. He described the nice coronation he'd given Powhatan. Indeed, he'd carried out all his instructions, although he admitted there was not much to show for it. Only a few samples of glass and pitch and tar, but no gold. No sign of an ocean, although he had gone around the falls as he'd been told to do, except he hadn't bothered with the barge. In addition, Newport delivered John Smith's map and a blistering letter from John which blamed the London Company for Jamestown's troubles. How could people in London know, John asked, what instructions to give a country they had never seen? And how could they expect the kind of men they'd been sending to Jamestown to succeed at anything? The company kept sending gentlemen who would not work, laborers without skills, runaways, and condemned men. The scum of the world, John called them, and troublemakers like Ratcliffe, who was returning now with Newport, and Archer, who had already returned. Never let these two return to Jamestown, he wrote. Back in Jamestown, however, John had made some of the improvements he had planned. Just as he had predicted, all it took was a pitcher of cold water poured down the sleeve to discourage a man from using bad language. And with his encouragement, there was more attention to business. But it was hard for men to work when they were hungry, and because there was so little trade, they were hungry most of the time. So, in January of 1609, when Powhatan suddenly sent John an invitation to visit and the promise of a boatload of corn, John quickly accepted. In return, of course, Powhatan made demands: an English house, a grindstone, copper and beads, 50 swords, some guns, a rooster, and a hen. John did send 2 Dutchmen and 2 Englishmen ahead to start building a house, but he was not giving in to all of Powhatan's demands. When he and 47 guards arrived at Werowocomoco 2 weeks later, he had copper and beads with him, probably a rooster and a hen, possibly a grindstone, but certainly no swords or guns. As it turned out, sending the men ahead to build the house had been a mistake. By the time John arrived, the Dutchmen had decided that life under Powhatan was better than life under John Smith. They decided to stay with Powhatan and promised to get him guns for the settlement. Furthermore, they told him that if he wanted to get rid of the English, he should first get rid of John Smith. This time, when John Smith arrived, there were no shouts of greeting for him, no platters of bread to welcome him. Powhatan received him coldly. What was John Smith doing here, he asked. He hadn't been sent for. Not sent for? John pointed to the messengers who had come to Jamestown. How could he be so forgetful? Powhatan laughed. He was not going to be tricked into easy dealings. If there was any trading to be done, Powhatan said, John Smith should understand that he was not interested in anything but swords and guns. I told you long ago, John replied. I had none to spare. All right, we're going to pause here again at the end of part 4, and we will continue with the reading of Pocahontas, chapter 2, in the part 5 of the next video.